the big cats and their impact on our culture and evolution as a species. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my MBS team, in particular Dr. Freeland and Professor McAlpin, for the continued dialogue that we kept running throughout this project that helped solidify it into what you'll see today. I'd also like to take the time to thank my faculty mentors who could not be here today, Dr. Paul Donato from the Anthropology Department, and Dr. Maggie Holland from the Geography and Environmental Systems Department. So I originally had a very catchy video provided by the sultry tones of Jeremy Irons, but you're going to have to settle for me today, I'm afraid. This is paraphrased from a mission statement from one of the leading world organizations involved in big cat conservation. And I think it nicely captures what I'm trying to get across about these animals and their impact on us. So I'd like to open then with a discussion of where I was coming from for this project and what my specific goals were in exploring this idea. My capstone is a way for me to explore science writing, my major. And when I first came to this idea for a project, my main concern was that I wanted to provide some new type of analysis, put a new idea forward. And I'd given a lot of consideration to how much of our time and energy had been devoted to looking into how humanity has impacted the natural world, whether we're discussions of overhunting and climate change. We have, definitely transformed the planet, but I was curious of ways in which we could explore the flip side of that discussion, how the natural world has contributed to what we are and who we are. To that end, I wanted to do a more broad exploration of nature and its impacts on humanity's identity. My advisors were kind enough to remind me that if I did not want to be writing this paper for 20 years, I should probably narrow my scope to one group of animals or one culture impacted by animals. I chose the big cats because I thought of them as a very iconic and emblematic of the nuanced, complicated, often adversarial, but truly profound relationship that humanity has with the natural world. And I thought that they'd be an excellent way to showcase this phenomenon and a way to perhaps kickstart thought into other lines of inquiry along these lines. And more broadly, how specifically have the big cats gotten into our culture, gotten into our minds, gotten into our genes, really, through coevolution, through adaptation, and through continued exposure over the long millennia. And as a science writer, I had another concern. How could I present this information in a way that is digestible to a lay audience, but is also informative? And this is something that I will revisit towards the end of the presentation. So the context for this presentation is rooted in natural history, in paleontology, in evolutionary biology, and paleoecology. For any understanding of how the big cats have affected us, I thought it would be important to begin here. The big cats have played several different roles in their relationship with us throughout human history. The most obvious would be that of predator. Although this is not the reality for most humans in the modern world, modern world only accounts for a very small percentage of humanity's tenure on the planet. And even so, there are still communities today, such as in far eastern Russia, parts of eastern and sub-Saharan Africa, and in Mesoamerica, where the reality of encountering a big cat is still a present concern. But the relationship is more nuanced than that. Big cats have also provided a slightly more, if not benevolent, helpful niche to us throughout our history. Scavenging from the kills of large carnivores such as the big cats has served as the primary source of protein for hominins, humans and their relatives, more or less throughout prehistory and into modern history. As conservation biologist George Schaller and anthropologist Gordon Lother discovered, in a series of walks throughout Tanzania's Serengeti National Park in 1969. There's a great abundance of readily and easily obtained flesh in the form of young or sick animals or recently deceased animals that under similar conditions, a mainly carnivorous hunter-gatherer band of early humans could have survived almost exclusively off of carrion. And in 1998, Palmquist and Ribas produced a study in which they proposed the likelihood that large carnivores, in particular the big cats and saber-tooths like Meganterium featured here, were critical in humanity's first migration out of Africa, as when temperatures were beginning to shift globally. We had harsher winters, and so moving out of equatorial Africa, that steady source of food, because big cats, unlike a carnivore like a hyena, have difficulty processing bone, and thus they often leave a fair bit of flesh on the bone to avoid injuring their teeth. This is actually a very real and important source of protein for some hunter-gatherer societies today, such as the Odegian Nanai in far eastern Russia, the San people throughout southern Africa. Still look on big cats in an almost liminal, numinous sense as providers. But big cats were also our competitors. Once we discovered fire and began using it to sharpen our spears and become more and more deadly and proactive as agents of predation in our ecosystems, we entered directly into competition with the big cats for prey. Now, that relationship became ever more complicated as we began to look on the big cats as symbols for some of our highest ideals. Tribal chiefs have throughout history used the big cats as emblems of their authority and their power and their nobility. Into the modern world, we have big cats continuing to be used as symbols for our highest ideals and aspirations. That relationship and that sense of connection with the big cats only became more nuanced as time went on. Getting into modern world, Clark Barrett, an anthropologist operating at UCLA, conducted a study in which young children, some German and some of Shuar descent. The Shuar are a hunter-gatherer group native to the Amazon. They were both tested on their ability to ascribe motive to predators. Literally, the test was a plastic lion and a plastic zebra were presented before the children. And the question was pretty straightforward. When the lion finds the zebra, what does the lion want to do? And overwhelmingly, despite differences in age, differences in cultural context, and differences in any meaningful, literal, real-world interaction with big cats, the children overwhelmingly responded correctly. This suggests, this and other resources that I come back to in my paper, suggest that we still have very pertinent and very persistent modules in our mind, still preparing us for the threat of the cat. And well into popular culture, without even going into the many centuries of heraldry, we are still preoccupied with the big cats as symbols. We're still preoccupied with the big cats as stand-ins and allegories for human characters and aspirations in our own stories. And we continue to tell these stories well into the modern world, just as Roger Allers and Robert Minkoff. Show of hands, how many of you can identify where that image comes from? Just real quick. How many of you heard the music in your head when you saw the image? This is, of course, from Disney's The Lion King. Yeah, the point being made that we continue to be so preoccupied with the big cats as symbols and as motifs, that we are still telling stories about them, and they still remain culturally salient and relevant. But the near future is less certain for our continued coexistence with the big cats. As Stephen Meyer points out in his 2006 book, In the Wild, the sort of ecosystems and world that we are engineering as humans, as we continue to transform ecosystems through habitat fragmentation, encourages the development of the sort of species we are less enamored with, namely small animals that reproduce quickly and often carry pathogens. Meanwhile, the charismatic species that we've been putting on our flags for hundreds of years, like the big cats, are on their way out. They are not built to adapt to this sort of world, and we saw this in the many megafaunal die-offs of the last ice age. Large animals that breed slowly are especially vulnerable to the kind of ecosystems we're creating. Lions in particular have lost over 95% of their historic range in the past 70 years alone. My capstone, coming towards the last section of it here, sought to grapple with what this might mean for humanity, in that the big cats have been such a persistent part of our psychological landscape. What would this mean if we lost this group of animals? Would there still be a place for them in our minds? Would they still be relevant to us after they're gone? My capstone's approach is one of incidental interdisciplinarity. I am not seeking to propose a particular course of action. My objective here is to evaluate, calling upon various different disciplinary perspectives, a new way of looking at human history, at ecology, and at a culture. This is about perhaps beginning to think of animals as being more relevant in a discussion of human history and human development. This is not a story about the big cats. This is a story about how the big cats have affected us, and using our relationship with them as an allegory, a metaphor, a shorthand for our relationship with the natural world, how it has shaped us, and how it continues to shape us. Just going to show my works cited, and I will take questions.
Thank you very much.
I'll take questions.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. And you seem to me to be a very big thinker. I liked your introductory questions. And I think you've developed a theme throughout, which now I want to know more. So, how do you expect to follow up on this research with your, I don't know what your plans are, but you, I guess, are going to be a science writer?
That is the
And
hope.
who do you expect to write for, or hope to write for?
All right. Well, to answer the first component of your question, where I would like to see this research go, especially if I'm heading it, who knows. I'd like to use this, the process I went through for identifying the major themes and the major lines of inquiry for this capstone led me to think that really any meaningful, and any group of animals that we've had meaningful interactions with over the say 180,000 years or more that humanity has spent before agriculture, before there was a word for nature and non-natural, when humanity is directly participating in nature. I'd say any group of animals that has caught our eye, that has been useful, that has been a predator, could be useful in a similar sort of case study. I think we could do a similar case study on, for example, wolves and dogs, as we domesticated them and they became part of our evolutionary history. But I'd like to continue that sort of thought process, and I'd like to see more research like this, in which the disciplines are not broken down into, say, psychological anthropology, which is about what it says on the tin, or evolutionary psychology, which is about how our evolutionary context affects our psychology. My analysis is about making a narrative that bridges these disciplines creates a sort of narrative about the way that animals are part of the human story. And I don't think there's a discipline right now that's very salient that maps onto that very well. Perhaps the very young field of anthrozoology might be relevant. And to answer that was very long-winded, I'm sorry. But to answer your second component of your question, who I hope to be writing for, my plan here is really not to be writing for a technical paper. I'm not particularly interested in writing for academia. I would say that any scientific inquiry or discussion is forfeit if it is not accessible to society at large, to the general public. I want to be able to market this in the sort of National Geographic kind of approach. I want this to be readable by someone who may not have a college education, but who's interested in the subject. I hope I've satisfactorily answered your question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Could I ask a quick follow-up to that? Give me, just as an example, something specific you did in your writing that exemplifies the goal that you've articulated for Patricia's question. How did you make your writing accessible for a non-expert?
Okay, well, the first thing I set out to do, the first thing I do when I'm taking concepts from more technical papers, the first thing I do before I consider anything else, eliminate jargon. Eliminate jargon whenever possible. If the language you're using is completely inaccessible to the person who's reading it, the project is forfeit. It's not going to reach the sort of audience that you need it to for it to be effective. That's step one. Step two, I would say, is to when disciplinary specific terms are necessary for any kind of understanding of the discussion, you need to take some time to explain them, but not so much time that the reader's eyes glaze over. I try to approach every such project like this that I've had, in which I have to take a more complicated technical subject and talk about it with someone who has no experience in that field. It is all about making it legible, and reasoning through analogy is another bridging strategy that I've focused a bit on. It is something that's I find to be a very useful shorthand for that. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, building on that question, as I look at your works cited, and you've mentioned the power of narrative. I see Humbaba, which you didn't have enough time to talk about, but if you could comment on the importance of the title. I see The Lion King. I see Panthera's story from Folk Hero Films. It's just interesting when you named your disciplinary perspectives, you didn't include English. And I think. So my question for you, before you tell us the story of Humbaba, is
if you're ready for a little bit of a diatribe
in this project, as a science writer, what did you learn about the importance of constructing this kind of complex narrative?
I learned chiefly that people process information through stories more effectively than almost anything else. That's why the main inspiration for this line of inquiry for me, a book my ideas advice, I'm sure sick of hearing about this book now. The Tiger by Jan Valiant came out in 2010. I was taking a physical anthropology course at the same time. And that was where I began to sort of realize that it wasn't just about getting the science out and in understandable language. It was about getting the science out in a way that was interesting and gripping. And The Tiger, don't read it at night, friends, don't do that. It's a very gripping narrative, and it did a good job of uniting a great deal of disciplinary perspectives in a cohesive way. And that, I think, is what made interdisciplinary studies make so much sense when it got here. This was about bringing together my own interest in the natural world and in animals to my own interest in human nature, such that we can have an agreed upon definition. And I'm sorry, I got carried away. There was a second part of your question.
No, reflect on your own process. Was it a challenge to craft this narrative for your capstone paper?
It was a challenge to find the right information to legitimize this narrative, I would say. It was, I suspected that you could take, when I came into this, my assumption would be that literally any animal that's been interacting with humanity from the start, from the Rift Valley 200,000 there's going to be some sort of impact. That was my assumption coming in. I didn't realize how hard I would have to look for people talking about that impact. That was my biggest barrier, finding relevant research, because this sort of inquiry is usually a footnote in a book about lions or a book about early human anthropology. There are very few works that are intentionally talking about this, and that's my struggle was then to build that narrative from what I had observed from various disparate sources. Did you want me to also talk about the topic?
Thank you. Yeah, and then the title, yes, please.
Yeah, I decided on the title in part because alliteration, right? But also because when I was taking Dr. Freeland's course, Science and Spirituality, some time ago, for the final paper I used Humbaba, who is described in Sumerian mythology as this horrifying monster who guards the realm of the gods, a cedar forest, and is described as having the face of a lion. I took Humbaba to symbolize our very complicated relationship with the natural world. Gilgamesh had to kill Humbaba to get access to the natural resources of the cedar forest, but he didn't like it. There's a line that often translates to when Enkidu, his sort of the first sidekick in literary history, is sort of egging Gilgamesh on to do the deed and do what they came here for. Gilgamesh says, and this is very telling, because this is a 4,000-year-old story, by the way, no, if we touch him, the glory of the light will be put out in confusion. And so I think it's very significant then that in such an old context, just as we're getting the sort of city-states that modern history is more preoccupied with, just as we're leaving the context of hunter-gatherer, the people telling these stories had an understanding that we were losing something crucial about ourselves and our experience in our world when we extinguished the natural world. It should be noted that what was once ancient Sumeria, now Iraq, is not a place very well known for its lions or its trees. Just saying. As for Homotherium was one of the most widespread genera of saber-toothed cats that disappeared along with many other large animals towards the end of the last ice age, quite suspiciously with the rise of ever more sophisticated human hunting techniques. Climate change was a factor, but most paleontologists agree that the megafaunal extinctions towards the end of the last ice age, definitely early humans played a part in that. So I thought Humbaba and Homotherium would then be a narrative about the big cats that we've extinguished, and then incorporate it into our cultural, mythological, psychological landscape because we missed them. And what that sort of existential angst might prove for future generations who will not have any literal big cats to look to when they want to symbolize strength or nobility or power.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Not even in zoos?
Oh, well, I mean, that's different. Professor Brown brings up that point frequently. I would say that, sure, I think it's possible that we'd have some zoos, yes, but I think not all animals are very suited to breeding in captivity. Just Google pandas, and you'll find endless. They're difficult to breed in captivity. But I would say that that's something different. That comes into the false narrative of we won the war against nature. We're here. The big cats are no longer a threat. We've repurposed them as entertainment. And I would say, not to criticize zoos, I spent my formative years in them, but I think to suggest that it's the same thing to have zoos and similar such facilities as somehow equally culturally and psychologically important to people as knowing out there somewhere, even if you don't have the money to go on safari in the Kalahari or wherever, knowing that they're out there, knowing that they are a part of our world and that they're in the ecosystems that they evolved to be in the ecosystems that we evolved in. The loss of that, I think, is the loss of something very poignant and powerful. And I'm afraid I didn't get enough time to explore that avenue adequately, but I have concerns, shall we say.
Thank you. For the sake of a level playing field, we'll end you there, but we could obviously carry on talking for a good long while. Thank you very much.